much, Marco, and thank you for some very interesting imagery, and particularly like the last video which you showed. Yes, so I'm Jessica Johnson. I work for the trade association representing the nuclear industry. We ourselves are obviously very interested in the work that is being undertaken by the Global Women's Hub, because as a sector we are struggling to find more women come into our industry, and any ideas we can gain out of these types of events and the networking opportunities offered by the Hub, hopefully we'll be able to implement them and get more gender balance in the nuclear industry. But moving on to the topic of this very first work panel, we're going to be looking at how work can have an impact on life, what the different challenges are, and what potential solutions can be. As you will have seen on the programme, we have 4 fantastic panellists with us today. So first of all, we have Dr. Benoît Rihoux in Political Sciences from UCLouvain. Next to him, we have Zoltan Vadkerti, who is the co-founder and executive director of the Work-Life Hub. Next to Marco, we have Mrs. Ioana Surpateanu. Close, almost. She's the co-head of EU Government Affairs and Innovation Strategy Leadership at Citi. And last but definitely not least, Ulrike Behringer, Global Account Manager, Automotive from Semiconductor. As you know, part of the goal of this hub is to have a real dialogue, have an exchange of views, come up with solutions together. And so whilst each of the panelists will have a brief introduction, an introductory statement, I would like to encourage you to start thinking about any questions which you may have, or any ideas which may come to mind, as there will be an opportunity for audience intervention during this panel. So without further ado, Zoltan, can I hand over to you for your presentation?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Can I just have the... And as a way of introduction, I wanted to apologize. I look like someone who didn't sleep or who have partied during the weekend. And you can also see it under my eyes. But what happened is my girlfriend is off to Italy for a 4 days long project meeting, so I left alone with 3 of our kids for the weekend. And if that wasn't enough by itself, the smaller one, who is only 8 months old, got sick. Yesterday evening, I only slept barely 2 hours. And literally, I was feeding him 2 hours ago, lunch, and getting ready, organizing emergency childcare for the afternoon. And so this conference couldn't have come at a better time for me. So I could get out from my home.
To express all your frustrations.
Yeah, so I could get out from my home and I could talk about this in a professional environment and dressed up nicely with other professionals. So first of all, and I also recognized from Cecilia's presentation in terms of health risks that during the last day I at least have experienced sleep disorder or deterioration in the sleep quality and also increased stress level. But Marco's presentation was really right on the spot, and it gave me some hope that my family is in the right order. But thank you very much for the invitation, and I wanted to thank especially Christine, who reached out to us, and we have been in contact with her over the last couple of weeks and months in terms of the preparation for this meeting. And she was the one who had the idea that we have a work-life integration maturity assessment model, that we should be using it and gauging the participants' take on work-life balance and how do they live work-life balance at their organizations and in their own life. So you might have come across these questionnaires, this survey. Secondly, I wanted to thank those of you who really took the time and filled out this 5-minute questionnaire. So and before I will be sharing with you what we have learned from the survey.
You want...
Okay. Thank you, sir. I just wanted to share with you some background information about the work-life integration maturity model. And for this, I would like to travel back in time to 2017 and 2018, when in the process of writing of our book, One Life, we interviewed, together with my colleague Agnes Uerecki, close to 250 organizations. And what we were looking into in these interviews is we wanted to find out what services, what programs do they provide these organizations for their employees in terms of improving the work-life balance of the staff, of the employees. And what we have learned from these interviews is that there is a huge gap in between those organizations who have really figured out how to offer proper work-life balance policies and between those organizations who lag behind. And what we set out really in our work and in the book to close this gap in between the organizations. And we also felt that these organizations, these companies need some solutions, some tools that they can use in measuring where they are in terms of their process on work-life balance and what improvement they can do in the future. And this is where we come up with a couple of tools, and one of the tools is a work-life integration maturity model. Maybe you know that maturity models, they are not new. It has been used in research, it has been used in consulting, and especially it comes from the IT sector, if I'm correct. But this model is able to provide some feedback for any organization to understand where they are in terms of their work, in providing better services, better quality services for their employees on work-life balance. So what we did is we looked into 30 different components and grouped around 5 different categories: services, leave policies, working time arrangements, working place arrangements, perks and benefits. And the model that you have come across online is a much user-friendly version of what we use, for example, when we work with organizations. But more importantly, as in every maturity model, we have identified 5 different levels: basic, ad hoc, standard, mastery, and visionary levels. And due to the lack of time, I'm not going to be able to go into details. You find more information online or also in our book. But I wanted to highlight that what we mean by visionary organizations. In the writing of the book, we come across one specific company, Adidas, which has really measured this work-life balance policy to a really high level. And in the book, we have dedicated one chapter, one case study chapter to Adidas. We went to Herzogenaurach, Iraq, and a couple of times we interviewed the work-life integration team, which is running work-life balance programs for 5,000 employees in the heart of Bavaria in Germany. So what we mean by work-life integration management team, this team sits within HR, within diversity and inclusion. There are 5 currently. What they do is they survey the upcoming needs of employees. They run childcare services, they run supportive services, they organize, they set up flexible work policies. So the Adidas has matured to a level where there are specific staff whose role is to look after these policies. And on the other end of the spectrum, you find organizations like basic organizations on the left side of the slide, where you find organizations which only comply with legislation or law. And what perhaps importantly, what I wanted to just highlight one more thing, is that it might be really sometimes difficult for any organization to jump in between the different levels. This is what we have learned in the last year, since we have been using this model. And maybe it's because of the fact that it's quite easy to set up flexible working policies or to set up leave policies, but to make these policies work, it takes sometimes years, because there are other factors, for example, culture change programs, for example, creation of a supportive culture, or providing enough, or having enough leadership support, or providing enough line manager skills for staff to be able to use these policies can take really time. But again, thank you very much for those of you who have filled out the survey. Maybe let's just, by show of hands, we a few. Thank you very much for for your feedback and taking your time off from your precious day and filling it out. What we have learned is what we have received, as you can see from the slide, we have received 50 plus responses, and those of you who are in research, maybe you know that 51 or 52 responses is not rigorous enough to have concrete recommendations. So what we did is we combined the hundreds of responses that we have already had collected over the years and combined it with those of you who have filled out this survey. As you can see, there are quite a few people from Europe who have filled out the questionnaire, but also as this is a global hub, I think the hub has made some waves into other cultures as well. We have received a couple of feedback from Nepal, also from Africa, and also from the US. I will be not going to go into detail in terms of other distribution of the data, but perhaps I will be writing one blog article about this, and you will be able to find more information on this. But I just wanted to highlight before highlighting three important factors that we have learned from the responses, is that in average, the organizations that have filled out the work-life integration maturity model is at the standardized level. So it's basically between ad hoc and mastery level. And what we know about these organizations, maybe also in your comments, you can perhaps question this or provide some feedback whether we know this or good or not, that in these cases, usually the policies are all set up to fit one size fits, or based on one size fits all solutions. The take-up of these policies is really relatively low, and what we know is also the impact is not that measured. And Christian was kind enough to send out one of the studies that I've been involved with recently. And in this study, we researched the public sector in terms of work-life balance policies and digitalization. And one of the recommendations, one of the findings that we have come across is that organizations, even though they have policies in place, they do not measure the impact of these policies. And this we also can see from the feedback, for example, that we have received from you. As you can see, when we asked the individuals who have filled out the survey whether within their organizations they run regular pulse surveys among employees to ask their feedback about their work-life balance, we see that there is still some room for improvement. For example, one organization that I've personally interviewed in this study, a Belgian public sector employer, we know that they have work-life balance policies for the last 20 years. And guess how many times they have measured the impact over the last, during these 20 years, the impact of work-life balance policies? When was the last time they measured the impact? Just give me a number. It was 10 years ago. 2 years ago. It was, even though they have yearly employee surveys, they do not measure. And we know that even they don't measure it, and even if they measure it, there is lack of data, perhaps in terms of the distribution between men and women, in terms of the take-up of these policies. And one findings that I wanted to bring this to you, and perhaps these findings can be also useful for the afternoon discussion, also for the hub to take further. When we asked respondents about whether the organization actively encourage new fathers to take parental leave, you see that also there is some room for improvement in this regard. And we sit at Schumann. Maybe some of you know, maybe I hope many of you know, that the European Commission, together the Council and the Parliament has just adopted the Work-Life Balance Directive back in June, which is going to be making some improvements for fathers. They are going to be providing through this law in every member state 10 days for fathers to take. It might be not that much in the Scandinavian countries, but the country where I come from, Hungary, it's 10 days for fathers. Is going to be a huge development. And what we know also, it's going to be individual right, and they cannot transfer it. So we're not going to be able to give it to your wife or to your husband or to your spouses. So legislation making and the international organizations have been really engaged with father's leave. I think I'm running out of time, so let me just go to to one of the findings that we see there's established practice, and it's about teleworking. Also, you can see this from the slide. There have been really great work in research, in academia, at the level of organizations, at the level of countries, in providing frameworks for teleworking, and there are great examples. Also, for example, in the study that Christine has sent out, or how organizations make teleworking work. And again, circling back to this study, I just wanted to bring you 6 key success factors that we have identified in this study. We have identified, in fact, 11 key success factors, but I wanted to highlight to you 6 of them. One of them is mutual trust. The other one is the involvement of employees. Line manager skills and competence is another important factor. Pilot testing, culture change initiatives, policies and legal framework, and we speak about father's leave, and we speak about parental leave. Obviously, a supportive culture, the creation of supportive culture that is without any gender bias is quite important to deliver on these programs. So I would like to encourage you to go into to find out more about this study from the document that you have received. Again, thank you very much from Christine. I wanted to thank you again for this invitation, and I look forward for the afternoon discussion and debate.
Thank you very much, Zoltan, for that very interesting presentation. And hopefully, as the Global Women's Hub moves ahead in the coming years, we may even rethink redoing the survey, perhaps in the next 2 years' time, and hopefully we will see a significant change or improvement in comparison. So thank you. Now I turn to Benoît. Do you have any initial thoughts in terms of the challenges and that we currently face, and some of the facilities which could be made available to employees to improve work-life balance?
Yes, thank you. I will try to make it short, and I would like to use as an example my own working environment, universities, as a kind of a test case for these issues. So universities are quite large employees. My own university, the one of Louvain, has 11,000 employees, if we include the hospital, right? So let's not consider the hospital because it's a special place, but the regular university, so to speak, has roughly 5,000 employees with 3 types of jobs and careers, very different ones. The first type of career are the administration and technical functions, which very much resemble, I think, they're very diverse, and they resemble similar functions in public administrations. And then there's 2 types of researchers, basically. You have the junior ones doing a doctoral research or a PhD or a postdoc, not yet tenured or not tenured, and many will move on outside of academia. Then you have the more senior ones, those who are tenured or tenure track. So let me focus on these research and teaching careers, and what are the challenges in terms of work-life balance. I think if I want to make a quick diagnosis, universities are, in general, I'm talking here about European universities, quite unbalanced in terms of gender distribution in the respective positions. There's been a very interesting project, EU-funded project on this. It's called the Garcia project. It's an acronym, Gendering Academia and then the rest, Garcia. There's many interesting papers on the web that demonstrate this. Basically, what happens is the higher up you go in the hierarchy, is very classical, right? As in many other organizations, the fewer female you have. Of course, with many differences across disciplines. Humanities are more female, social sciences are more or less balanced. Then the other disciplines are more like 30% female, 70% male, and then you have STEM, sciences, overly male in terms of the researcher positions. And yet, and here's the paradox, I think sincerely, most university managers and rectors and authorities are very much aware they want to tackle this structurally, including, and this is now framed as such, the whole life-work balance issues. It was not there, say, 5-10 years ago. Now it's in the picture. It's politically stated. So what are the specific problems? If I want to make a quick diagnosis, I think universities are an example of, and this is documented in the literature, what is called greedy institutions. Greedy. These are institutions that expect full involvement from their employees. The model is science is a vocation, right? It's a vocation. You should be a full believer and almost like a priest. You to devote yourself to science, and the rest is noise, is a nuisance is a pressure from the outside. So. And most people who do research, especially those who become more senior, do both teaching, their own research, research management, getting funding, internal service, and services to society. And so that's the model. That's what people expect to get. And therefore, what you have is you have people exiting this system, especially female professionals, because they believe there will be such a high pressure on them in their career. The career is not appealing. And the core stage of career building is the PhD, and then the postdoctoral process, which now entails, is mandatory along mobility, geographic mobility. And this occurs in the year range of, say, around 25 years of age and 35 years of age, this crucial phase. And here you see quickly also an exit of many female, very promising researchers and say, scholars in the being. So you have a very, very strong pressure, especially for young mothers, and to a certain extent also for young fathers. But because of the very different, still in many countries, different patterns in parental roles, it makes a huge difference in the career patterns. And of course, there is high competition for tenured positions in universities, and therefore there's also gender biases in the selection committees, which themselves are very much male. So just to finish, I think this quick diagnosis, which is not very, how shall I say, pleasing, not very positive. There have been some initiatives in many universities. It's quite of recent and ongoing, and at different, let's say, level of speeds in different countries. Some, of course, countries are much stronger, like the Nordic countries for a long time. But for the rest, like including Belgium, we're still not so far away. Well, there is increasingly specific advantages for maternity leaves and young mothers. It's accommodated for in the CVs and so on, and for competitive applications. It's actually a formal rule now in Belgium. There's specific extra funding for mobility for young parents, in particular young mothers. There's childcare facilities in some universities, daily childcare. Daytime childcare facilities. There is leave arrangement. There is meeting times are not, formal meetings are not organized after a certain hour, and so on and so forth. This is kind of structural. However, even with these first initiatives, you still have structural issues. And I want to conclude on this. And in particular, you still have this major issue of, which is to a large extent cultural, this issue that there is still a very strongly uneven parental role distribution. And this means that this takes off some time for the CV building of young researchers, those who are female, and take more time in the family. The leave arrangements are seldom exploited by female and also by male young promising scholars, because they feel it's going to impact their career negatively. There, perhaps even deeper, there are still some gender stereotypes in the profession, and both from the part of male and female researchers. They will portray themselves in a certain way, and they will portray the other sex or gender in a certain way. There are these are called mirror stereotypes. I will have this negative stereotype on myself and a positive one on the other one, and vice versa, especially for the female researchers. Finally, there is a very major issue, at least in my field, in academia, of what I call self-exclusion or self-selection bias. People will not apply to positions, especially female researchers, because they don't believe they will be strong enough, qualified enough, they will be too modest in interview situations, and so on. So bottom line, a lot of movement going on, a lot of initiatives, but structural issues are very much still unresolved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benoît, for that very insightful intervention. And some of the ideas that you put forward is very interesting. You said that the options are out there, but very often people don't take them up for fear that it will impact their career. One thing that I've been very surprised at is, for example, in Sweden, both parents are expected to share equally the maternity and the paternity leave. So very often they have 12 months and the mother does 6 and the father does 6. And actually in Sweden, if the father doesn't do his fair share of that parental leave, as it were, it's actually frowned upon. So they have that inverse situation where really, if you don't do it, you are seen in I'd say, in a more negative light. And maybe that is one way of getting things to change. Huh? So now if I can turn to this side of the table, Ioana, could you share some of your insights in terms of the challenges and the options which could be integrated to improve the situation?
Yes, I'd actually like to keep it very short because I want to have a debate, and the perspective I'm going to focus on is probably a little bit different from what we've heard so far, and actually segues very well into what you said, that some of the options are there, but you do not use them, not out of fear of not being promoted or not out of fear of having an impact on your career, but maybe because you're passionate about what you do. And you don't have a choice of delegating what you do to other teammates, etc. And this is a little bit my case. So just a few words about myself. I work for Citigroup for almost 3 years. I lead their innovation strategy, and I interface with European institutions when it comes to fintech and innovation. I also work with our markets and infrastructure investments team that looks at investing in startups. And I am part of a mentorship program looking at supporting startups with female CEOs or CCOs or CFOs, etc., mostly in the financial innovation space. And by that, I also include crypto, digital assets, and all that new wave of innovation that we've been hearing, I hope you as well, about recently. So I have quite a handful, I would say. And although my company offers all of the options that we've heard about today, flexible working hours, working from home, and all the other things, I don't really make use of them because I don't really have the time. It's a reality. And even though I am the proud mother of a wonderful 8-year-old daughter, of a wonderful 8-year-old little girl, and she's definitely much more important than work to me, it's very fair to say I do not have a work-life balance. My passion is my work and my daughter. And I guess somehow, subliminally, deep down in my head, I think that I'm also inspiring her by this lifestyle. I don't know if it's healthy or not. But this is what I currently do, and I just can't afford to be away from what I do for a very long time. I mean, even the idea of, being away for a month or two, it feels like, it feels so kind of dazzled when I would come back because I work on so many projects that I prefer to keep this kind of intensive working life and working kind of ecosystem in place, just so I could also feel comfortable with myself and feel like there's a continuation. So here I am an example of, a person who's not using all the flexibilities enabled by working in a corporation, even though I have them at disposal, because I really am passionate about what I do. And if you are like me, and I'm sure there are many people like me, women and men, the only advice I would give you is to calibrate your achievements, figure out what you want to do. And as a woman in particular, don't be afraid to fight for what you think you deserve. So I agree with what was said before, that sometimes women in interviews are relatively shy to ask for higher pay or higher positions. Don't. Know your worth, capitalize on your achievements, and don't ever be afraid to ask for what is yours and take it from me. I work in finance, and I focus on tech. So, I mean, I think a combination of sectors that are not known to be the most friendly towards women. But there are ways to do it. There are biases. There's, the pay gap between men and women is a reality, and it has been acknowledged. But don't let these obstacles get in the way of achieving what you want. And, it's up to each individual to figure out how much they want to dedicate to their work, how much they want to dedicate to, to their personal life. But in the end, you have to be happy. I am happy with this lifestyle for the moment. I don't know if I'm good, but for now, I am, because I get to work with many talented people. I get to help many talented people, and I'm going to continue doing it for as long as I can. So yeah, that's on my side.
Thank you, Ioana. And I think the most important thing is that you're happy with what you do.
Yes.
And I think that is also a key point, particularly in the conversations that we're having today or as we're having in the hub. It also comes down to personal choice. And women and men should be free to decide how they want to work, whether they want to be a house husband, whether they want to be a housewife, whether they want to have the full career. Yeah. And I think that's something that is very important in these conversations. You need to respect the decisions of each individual. So, and as long as you're happy, I think that's the most important.
I agree.
Ulrike, I now hand over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Rihoux. I work in the semiconductor industry. I have a background in electrical engineering, so I know how it feels being mostly the only woman in the room. It has advantages, but sometimes it also has disadvantages. But also for me, what you said, it's like you're passionate about it, and I really respect that. And I think where it comes down to, where also a lot of the imbalances come from, is that those people who are passionate about their work expect this from others. So it's a cultural thing, because if you put down a culture and you do not live up on it, then this is where the gap comes from. So if someone is passionate and the other one doesn't want to pursue a career, then both should be okay with the other person's choice. And I think this is also really important. But really for me also, when I look into the work-life balance and what employers offer, it really comes down to if a culture is implemented and if managers live up on it. So I like the example with the Viking King, where it says the first among others. And this is exactly what we need to have. Managers should not feel superior of others and set rules for employees, but then do not follow their own rules. And so I really like it working for Semiconductor, because everyone is the same. When we have all-day meetings, if someone comes late, and even if it's the European president, he has to donate €5 for a charity cause. If your telephone rings, regardless of which position you are, you have to pay. And this is where you feel home and where you feel like, okay, I'm integrated and I'm really allowed and respected to be who I am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and indeed, treating everybody equally is also, I think, a very important point. And what you were also saying, yes, there is sometimes a risk that those who are very passionate about what they do expect others to do the same. And it's coming back to this kind of point that everyone should be treated equally, and everybody should also be free to make their own decisions as how to want to live their career, as it were.
And I have that sometimes as well, that I feel like, okay, but this is so easy, why does not everyone think the same? And we sometimes really have to step back and reflect on, okay, this is just how I think, how I like to do things, but leave others the room to try out things differently and just wait for the restart. Even so, sometimes it's very challenging for me. But really also that stepping back and leave others the room to be themselves.
Thank you. So, as I said at the beginning of the panel, GlobalWo.MenHub is all about dialogue. So I now look out towards you, the audience, to see whether you have any experiences that you would like to share, any questions that you would like to raise to any of the panelists. It's looking very quiet down there. Oh, no, we have one here. So there is a microphone in the room somewhere?
Yeah,
it's in the seat.
Every chair.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much for all these marvelous experiences. And I just wanted to share this discrimination of women that at ESA Business School many years ago we studied the causes, the reasons why it is so, and 85% of times it is because they can become a mother or they are a mother. So it is not a gender issue, but a maternity, a motherhood issue mostly. This is really impressive, and I think I don't know whether this is the case in your or not. It would be interesting to know, because what we were trying to find out, and we had make some research later, is why, and this is so. Then with this new leave of absence also for men, that it's so difficult for them to get, because normally or they don't, or the company doesn't want to. The idea of the European Union is now they are equal, there will be no more discrimination, okay? But then the thing is that you always will have the work-centric or the dual-centric, and then the discrimination will be for the work-centric, the dual-centric, be a woman or a man. I don't know, what are you living in your reality? I would love to know that. Thank you.
Who would like to answer that first on this panel?
I can go first if you want.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. So for on Semiconductor, it's really equal. If a man wants to take up 6 months or a whole year, it's no problem. Even we have 2 big sites in Belgium, and about 20% of the employees are on part-time for various reasons. If it is for family reason, for private reason, or someone even wants to go on a world trip, just discuss it with HR. And the beauty is they implement the government rules, and additionally they offer individual solution what works. So there I'm very fortunate to work for that company, because they understood talent is rare and talent is at a certain place, so they rather prefer to move a role somewhere rather than moving the person. So they really understood if we work in a partnership, employer and employee, then you have less turnover, you have less retention. So even I'm located in the Munich office, we have several men that work part-time. They say, well, I want to take care of the kids myself, so they do that. But it comes down to that partnership and that dialogue. Mm-hmm. So yes.
Sorry, can you repeat what the 85% stat was about? Because you said 85%, and I didn't catch the what followed.
The argument for discrimination is not because it's a woman, but because can be a mother.
Okay, so to again talk about my situation in my company, I am a single parent. Okay, so I'm a single parent. I am a mom. It's probably the best thing I've ever done in my life. I don't honestly feel any discrimination as a result of that. On the contrary, if there are always issues that I need to go to my daughter's school, or there's something that I need to do, then I'm probably very lucky to have a good manager and a great team. I don't, like I said before, I don't always like to delegate, but that's for long term. But yeah, there's a lot of flexibility. I think, especially in those, semiconductor is not an easy field either, nor is finance. So I think in those fields and sectors where you know that you're very demanding with the people that work for you, you also have to show humanity at one point, right? So it's important to show that flexibility to enable the people to keep on wanting to work for the company. So again, personally, I've only had good experiences with that. If I think about my male colleagues, only a few of them are parents. And yeah, I mean, none of them works flexibly. They work from home from time to time, but I'm sure that if there was a demand or if there was a need for them to work part-time, it would be enabled. So yeah, I guess I work for a good company too.
I mean, maybe that is a kind of a question around the room. I also have the opportunity, so I have again, it's a very demanding job. I have to work outside of hours, you have travel, etc. But then, for example, if my daughter is sick or the creche is closed, then I have the flexibility to work from home. If I need to go do something with her, I can leave early to go and do it. So it's kind of a win-win situation, I would say, for the employer and for the employee. But very often when I speak to people, they're always kind of looking at you with eyes wide, going, wow. And sometimes I wonder, is this such a rare occurrence? So maybe, is there a show of hands around the room, the organizations that you work for, do they give you that kind of flexibility?
Well,
One.
I mean, I guess we don't
Half. So I think I see 3.5 is the number of hands I've counted on a room of about 4.5. It's growing, that's okay. So we're at around about 10% of the room has that as an option. Maybe that is something that more companies should be looking to engage in. Maybe one option coming out of this panel.
Yeah. Well, the most advanced examples that I have come across in my career is those organizations that have many policies in place. They have supportive services, they have flexible work options, they have leave policies, you name it. And they make it available or make it free for individuals to use it. And whether their circumstances, their life circumstances, or the situation of their personal or family life demands is they are able to choose from these services freely on a daily basis. And I think this is what is your example. But plus, through these provision of different services, these services these services and policies are also linked with objectives. And this is one key point, I think, that I wanted to highlight, that the most successful, the most effective work-life policies only work if they are coupled with organizational level objectives, strategic goals, and they go hand in hand. This is what a trend that we have been seeing over the last couple of years, that the work-life balance policies are not just there to be there as a mommy issue or to cater someone who would like to work from home on every second weekend, but they also being used to deliver on business objectives. And I think when these two go hand in hand together, for example, in the case of Ioana, she has purpose in her job. She is really committed to her job, but she has also the availability to choose from all the services that is provided by Citi Group. So when these two are nuanced and they are leveled, then a really great employee experience is created.
If I may jump in? Mm-hmm. I think it's true that on most occasions an important change in the organization, a virtuous change, should come from the top. On the other hand, if I want to tell you a small story for myself, sometimes virtuous change, comes more ad hoc and also bottom up. Let me tell you a few words about my story. So my eyes are perhaps in better shape than yours today because I have 4 daughters, but they are age 25, between 25 and 15, so they manage, for themselves. But 20 years ago, I was doing my PhD, and 3 of them were really small, like aged 5, 3, and a baby, basically. And I was a teaching assistant at my department, and so full-time contract teaching assistant and PhD researcher. And the baby was intolerant to mother's milk, which happens. It's quite rare, right? Which means that I was not breastfeeding, but you see what I mean, feeding the baby quite frequently. My wife was working full-time as a physical therapist. And our income structure was quite equal. As a young assistant at university, was quite modest, and she had quite a good salary. So that's also an important condition, right? Meaning I was under pressure. And I love doing this. I love having this connection with my daughters, of course. And the department meetings were in the late afternoons, between 4 and 6. And so at some stage, I approached the head of the department and said, no, I cannot come to meetings anymore at that time because, as a father, etc., I was breaking a taboo, and it did not work. Okay, you don't come to meetings, get replaced by somebody. And then I made a sort of small lobby inside with a few other colleagues, male and female, in the same situation. And we won, basically. And now it's become a standard practice. It was not a policy, it was just a response from the organization, a response. It was not a, how shall I say, a big political move. It was just very practical, right? I was perhaps even less gender conscious I was back then than now, right? But I think so. The 2 points I take out of this is sometimes modestly you can break a small taboo, right? A small thing, and it brings about a change. And this policy from my department was imitated by other departments. And the second one is that it's playing collective. I don't want to frame this necessarily as a sort of conflict. Sometimes there is a conflict actually, but pressure from a certain number of people who are committed to the organization, who say we want to do our job correctly, but in order to do so, we also want to be fulfilled and happy in our family life. This can be listened to by the organization.
I believe that there are more questions from the audience. Yes.
One more comment, I guess, just follow up on this is that it's Christina with UPS, and we're always looking at how to incorporate more diverse practices, also with talent retention and acceleration of women within the workforce. And one thing that I've caught over the years is that there may not necessarily be discrimination of mothers, but perhaps we hold back opportunities before they even come up.
Yes.
Right? So if there's a job involving travel, we assume that maybe a new mother wouldn't want to come out after maternity leave and take that job. When in fact she might be very interested in that. So we're trying to encourage stopping that unconscious bias beforehand. And then obviously if the company implements good policies down the road, they shouldn't be concerned about that either way, because they're going to have a way to help facilitate it. Because some feedback that I remember hearing at another event, for example, is a lot of companies were quoting that their women were leaving after they became mothers, and they thought it was because they wanted to stay home and dedicate themselves to that. But in fact, a lot of time it was because the husband's career was accelerated at a faster rate than the woman's. And so we're holding back women, after that change in their life without even consulting with them. So something else for people to consider.
Maybe that's another question then out to the audience here. I mean, because you say very often the mothers are sort of holding back because the husbands' careers are taking off. I mean, for those of you in the room, how many of you do you have it that it's actually your partners who are taking on a fair share of the load at the home, or even more of a share? We're still only at the 10% of the participation, but yeah, I mean, that's...
Would they have asked a man the same question? And thank goodness they asked, right? And so that's what kind of led to the path. So there's going to be change that happens before we can get to this equalization that serves for the company.
But it is partly as well, as you were saying, it's also if both parties are taking on their fair share of things at home, I think it enables them also to have a better work-life balance as well, because you have your work and then you have your home environment, but you're not taking on a full-time job plus 90% of the home activities as well, which is what can also put a lot of pressure on people, and very often women. Does the panel have any thoughts? Or are there any more questions in the audience? We still have about 10 minutes for the coffee. Yes, we have one here.
Hello. Hi, Ian Burns from Artesian Resources. Thank you all very much for your presentations. My question is, I see a tendency towards 0 hours contracts, more precarity in the workplace. I wonder what the panel feel about this and how it might impact on bringing the gender balance into parity.
Maybe for those in the room, you might want to explain what a 0 hours contract is, because I think that's quite a UK specificity. Maybe if you could explain.
Yeah, well, I mean, a 0 hours contract is basically, I suppose if we're going to encompass it, let's talk about freelancing. Or being engaged as an independent, i.e. not being regarded as an employee. My question came to mind when Benoît, when you were talking about academia, and obviously since Bologna, there's been more of a move to commercialise the academic world, and fewer positions are being offered on a full-time permanent basis. But of course, this is the case across the board. It's from academia through to the private sector. Obviously, this impacts on everyone, but as I say, I just wonder if the panel feels this could bring the genders closer together, or does it bring about more of a struggle for women? Because again, thinking about Benoît's comment and it's something I'm aware of, that a lot of women are reluctant to apply for positions that they perceive to be out with their grasp than men do. This is obviously a societal issue, but does this precarity, and do you think this more precarious nature that we'll see now in a career path, do you think this will have an impact one way or the other?
If I may try to reply to it. At least in my field, in the academic sector, there is a double tendency. The first tendency is to have a sequence of short-term contracts, sometimes full-time, but for like research contracts. And the second one is part-time contracts, even more senior, like people like a 10% or 20% position, long-term, right? But only, and then the result is that he or she has to add up multiple positions. I think it has a double negative impact for what we're talking about today. The first one is that a great advantage of a full-time employer in a country where there is a sufficient provision of services, right, is that it comes along with a package of arrangement and services for the employee. In this case, in my university, for instance, childcare facility, access to whatever other, advantages. So if you have to, you cannot negotiate this if you have 5 or 6 or 7 employers. And so in that sense, for a male or female employee, he would like to make these kind of arrangements. It's simply the vis-a-vis is not there to discuss. And secondly, there is an economic pressure. And so it's if you have, and I can see this with some colleagues at another university in Belgium, I will not name it, who chooses to have more part-time contracts. I can see that it's less actually gender-friendly for female scholars, because they will simply decline these multiple short part-time positions, because simply they cannot make the arrangement. And it also creates an economic uncertainty to some extent. So in a way, the old-fashioned, the classical, employment contract is a stronger guarantee. In this kind of quasi-public sector, it's public or quasi-public, it depends on the funding structure. But the move is going in the other direction currently, I'm afraid. To cut a long story short.
We have a question over here.
Do I take the microphone? Or?
Yes, please.
Hang on a second.
Hello.
You have to push on the button. There is a button inside, in the
chair.
booth. Yes.
Push to talk.
Yes.
I have pushed, and apparently you hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Two short questions. Regarding mutual trust, I sometimes ask this question deliberately to the audience and panel. Who trusts whom in the audience? That's one question. And the other is, well, the academically gifted may be clever, but what the world needs is intelligence. To my mind, the proportion of clever yet unbalanced human beings in this world seems to be reaching dangerous proportions. So, what to you the finality of education, or what do you consider? How would you define the notion of competence today? Thank you.
Who would like to respond?
I particularly like the first question, which I didn't understand. So could you please repeat who trusts whom in the audience? So does that apply to us as well, or is it just within the audience kind of mechanism?
Oh, it applies to you, to me, to the audience, to people outside the audience. Yeah. I mean, what I mean is that there's a terrible world existential and trust crisis that is deep, underestimated, and dangerous. And without trust, any policy shall fail, whatever the political program anywhere in the world. And now there is a new European Commission. Well, this new European Commission, how can a new European Commission imposed on the citizens by a European Commission president imposed and not elect possibly recover the citizens' lost trust in the EU's institutions and have any chance of succeeding? So to my mind, the very foundations on which the new European program is based, these very foundations are unhealthy, unstable, and therefore not sustainable. So I'm going back to this notion of trust, mutual trust. Well, with the new European Commission team regarding Europe, naturally, I'm not very optimistic. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we're not here to discuss your skepticism. I think there's a different topic to the panel. And like I said earlier, you asked about trust. This happens to be one of my main areas of focus, because I actually believe where the technology is going is into a lot of trust on algorithms. So you want to better the relationship between people and machine, trust math, trust algorithms. So that's what I would answer.
Am I still getting through?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I had a very interesting discussion with Huawei, actually, regarding artificial intelligence and algorithms. It is important to remember the mindset that creates the algorithms, a mindset that can be either constructive or destructive.
So, yeah, okay. Okay, yeah.
I think it's perhaps it's probably a side discussion.
It's a completely side
discussion. Yeah, so if I could just, I have a question here coming back to the work-life balance issue. Christine?
I want to bounce back on one point. No.
You can just...
T'as pas de fil.
T'as pas de fil.
Just speak up.
If not, in the meantime, we have one question here.
Okay.
Okay.
Just one, because we very interesting to say that you gave your example about how an organization is behaving and trying to compensate. You, Zoltan, explained that you have to fix objective in the organization, and you were really showing that you can
bypass objectives.
or supersede it.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the debate is wider than just a man or a woman in an organization.
Correct.
I think that there is a more wider discussion, because leaving the organization alone with the people, when you are married, the chance that you are working in the same organization with your wife is narrowed. So I think that how can you structurally elevate the debate and ensure that you support the couples? And the reason why I'm asking that, all the organizations are looking for money. They will not think about the collateral damage. So somebody has to think about that. In all the discussion, I didn't hear anything about this extra layer who is taking care of about the wider picture.
Yes.
And
maybe take Christine's question as well.
yeah, it's not a question, it's a comment, because I heard the gentleman, and I think that the word trust is essential, because I've lived myself in a work environment where mistrust was leading. So you can't build anything. Okay, the European Commission is an example, but it's one of the biggest example on between citizens and public authorities where there is mistrust. And then you have fear, and then you have precarity, and then you don't know if the people in front of you wants your good or not. So basically, this is basically a little bit one of our ideas that we had at the start of this hub, is that everybody here can speak what they want, who they want, and as long as they are respected. We don't have the same ideas. We don't belong to the same family. We don't have the same beliefs. But we can share them without fear. This is what does not happen today. And maybe in organization there is like a formatting. You know, if you are inside the format is okay, and if you are disformatting, then you are out.
Thank you, Christine.
Yes, I want to bounce back on two small points. Mr. You asked a question about competences. I think the more I think about it, also in my daily life, I think a key word is avoid stereotyping. So there's multiple ways you can name competences. And for instance, sometimes when you use examples of a person who may have such a competence, you would use a male or a female example or illustration. In French, in the French language area, it even goes on how you use the term, right? The term may be used male or female for a profession, right? So you would say programmeur, right? Programmer, right? Programmeur, not programmeuse, right? And then it goes along with the stereotype. I think it's, I know there's a big debate, some people disagree, but it's also the words you're using, the examples you're using are very important when you name competences. That's part of the cultural change in a way. And sometimes people might think it's a bit, how should I say, artificial or pushed too far, but it's very important more than symbolically. And second point, on Luc's point, I think this part of this issue about couples is also a sort of cultural change. It means that the organization needs to think beyond its domain. Think about the employee as part of another system, right? And that's what I would call, say, bright management, is going beyond the organization, which only few do, I think.
Thank you. Any more? Ulrike?
Yeah, I also want to respond to Luc's question, or it's more kind of discussion, because you said you feel there's another layer missing, helping to elevate a decision. On the other side, I feel we're talking about individuals, we're talking about flexibility, you know, offering solutions and possibilities. And then I think in Spain, the government just decided to have a time and attendance tracking system, which I feel is then kind of a government decision, a level above the individuals. And to me, to be honest, this feels contradictory. If a government dictates me that I have to fill in an attendance or time tracking system I want to have kind of the control over my agenda. So I'm not sure how others feel about that, if that's contradictory. And I think it also comes a bit back to what is the competencies, who should decide on what's best for you. Should we not more kind of train people on culture and giving up on stereotypes and really train people?
Just quickly, because
as we're talking about Spain, I can talk about that. Yeah, sure. They are going against flexibility with all this, with the argument that they need that in order not to do more extra hours or just. But this is nonsense, absolutely nonsense, and for the companies, it's absolute nonsense. Yeah. So we are doing our best just not to be fined, no? And that's it. And just another short thing: the corporate social responsibility in the internal is corporate family responsibility, and in all the research we found that companies that are flexible, oxygenating, etc., have 400 more commitment in their employees than the ones that are rigid, which is very important too. So these are numbers that also the companies have to listen to, because absenteeism is going down 30%, etc. No? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just a small remark to Luke's. All the things we're discussing about today apply to corporates mainly. I work with the startup sector quite a lot. It's at the wild, wild west there. So there, all of these flexibility issues and kind of incentives. No. But this is where I think we should converge and help, right? Talking about a strategical move, this is a sector we should focus on and maybe inspire them with the corporate best practices, because corporations have gone to the stage where they are today as a result of a lot of pressure, right? Social, political, etc. But the startup world is, like I said, a very tough environment. And we can talk about gender balances there and all of the other things, but I think this is the sector that needs a lot of help from policymakers and corporations. So we need to provide, not we, the private sector, but policymakers need to provide some sort of incentives, right? I mean, we can again debate about who tells you what to do, what constraints, but you need to have some incentive. As if you want to, my utmost respect is for the people who have the courage to be entrepreneurs. It's not an easy thing to do. Women, men, it doesn't matter. I have my 200% respect for them, but that environment needs some incentives from the rest of us who are lucky to be to be working in more favorable settings. So yeah, strategically, this is what I think we should focus on. Oh, sorry.
That's no problem. Thank you very much, Ioana. So thank you for that very interesting debate. In terms of some of the ideas that come out of it, one of the challenges is actually, even though some of the companies are offering different options in terms of parental leave, etc., very often employees, men and women, are not taking them up because they're of fear that it could have an impact on their career. But there's also some interesting solutions which have been put forward today. I mean, first of all, of course, work-life balance policy should be integrated into companies' objectives. So that's really how to integrate it into the company policy itself. Then that notion of flexibility, so that you are there able to work and go to things in the evening or to travel, and at the same time you have that flexibility. For example, if you need to leave work to look after your child, etc., that companies integrate that. And that ends up being a win-win for both the employee and for the organization. And then also the fact that you can change things from the bottom up. So if employees just identify a problem and they've identified a potential solution, work together in order to get that implemented into and create change. So I'm standing between you and the coffee break, but before you all go out, please could you give a round of applause to our great panelists. Thank you.